We had our first building in Ferndale, and it was kind of curious that the state liquor store was on one side of it and the gas company was on the other. And when we leased the building and got to knocking down some internal partitions, we found that bats had gotten into the attic, and we hauled out about 20 wheelbarrow loads of bat crap. And so one of my favorite stories about Whatcom is between the liquor store and the gas company and the 20 wheelbarrow loads of bat crap, we started a college.
When we were in what I call the Wild West days of Whatcom, and the head of health services was a nurse who was quite the character, and she rode a motorcycle in the back door of Northwest building, and by my desk, down the hallway, and out the front door while there was a board meeting going on. And I mean, it was no like a little scooter, it was a motorcycle. And here comes Joanne, and it was just, oh, there she goes again doing something. And she goes right between my desk and what I believe was Lane's desk, down the hallway, and right past the president's secretary, board meeting going on, out the front door. And we all laughed. I mean, it's funny, but whether it was unexpected or not, it was still funny, and you just laugh and you go about your job. If you stopped working every time somebody did something crazy, then you never get anything done.
Our staff always would go to conferences or workshops so that we could continue our professional development. And we had one staff member who slept in the nude at home. And when we went to conferences, we all, because we had a very small travel budget, I mean, tiny travel budget. So we all slept in one room, no matter how many there were of us. Sometimes somebody'd bring a sleeping bag and sleep on the floor. And this particular staff person slept in the nude, and we all complained about it, but she never did anything about it. So I sewed her a nightgown, and we kept it in the filing cabinet. And when it was time to go to a conference, it was my job to bring it along.
There were no classes. There was no campus. The mathematics department, there wasn't a department, but mathematics was taught in a church. Actually, it was a former grocery store that's now a church. So the room in which the classes were taught had a very, very high ceiling. So there was a lot of echoing going on when students were being helped. There were only 3 of us, myself and 2 others. And so I approached then the head of maintenance, Bill Cochran, and we tried to brainstorm a way that we could knock down the sound. So Bill went to a storage area and found this old stage curtain that we then rigged up inside this open space, and it made it look like an Arabian tent. And this became the device that knocked down the sound.
The facility change that was most dramatic, you would think it would be the current one, but it was really when we had the converted grocery store on Marine Drive, because there were like 4 classrooms. And the counselors and advisors were so excited because they could meet in the meat locker with students, because the door would be, they could close the door and have a private conversation with students. They had no place to do that before.
I started at Marine Drive. Okay, so I remember my first day getting my key to the office and being told how I was going to enter the building through the back part of the grocery store, and how you had to jiggle the key a certain way to get in. And when I started, it was in December, so it was dark. So I'll never forget jiggling that key, and they said make sure and have a flashlight. So I remembered I better make sure and bring a flashlight, so I used it. So you went through the back door, and it was a pretty open area with a lot of people in a small area. So I learned that everybody took turns making phone calls at that time because it was pretty open. So if you're going to have a personal phone call, you better go find a closed door to do that in.
We were also in that building, there were faculty we needed to prepare for class, grade papers, and we were all in the attic. And our desks, we shared desks, but it was based on your height where your desk was assigned, because the shortest person was under the eaves. So that was some of those early facilities.
When we were building the pavilion, the original pavilion, before you did the big remodel, we were having some difficulties between the architect and the contractor. And there was a question whether the steel they had brought was correctly prepared. There was a question that they had welded together pieces to make larger pieces, and they weren't supposed to do that. So one night, rather than facing the issue that the college might sue them, the contractor came and took all his steel and loaded it on a truck and took it back to refabricate. Now, that would have been interesting by itself, except Whatcom Community College has the most helpful, friendly custodial services you'll ever find. So they turned all the lights on for them so they could see to steal the steel better. And I've always loved that story.
Some of those beginning years, one of the co-ops I worked with was out in Van Zandt. And many of the people that lived and had their children attending the Van Zandt Co-op preschool, which later became known as South Fork Valley, lived very part-time working. They were totally committed to families. Many of them had moved from big city, Bellevue, Seattle, and they were kind of hippie types. And using marijuana was perfectly, even though it was certainly illegal in those days, part of their culture. And one of the things that I had to do is sit in on board meetings and oversee this business aspect of it. And Regina Preby, she and I team taught some of the schools. And we drove out to this board meeting, and everybody had been there for an hour and they were completely stoned. And it was so, we didn't build the agenda, they did, but it was our job to keep them focused and let's go back to the agenda. And I remember us just shaking our heads that was the longest 3 hours we'd ever spent because everybody was like half asleep.
I'll tell you one interesting thing is there's a sculpture that's in the middle of the campus, and it's the Gerald Tsurakawa sculpture of the orcas, and they're metal and they're really beautifully shaped, elegant, and I was involved with that. I was instrumental in bringing Gerald Tsurakawa to the college. There was tremendous resistance to that because it was not a big salmon, or a big orca, and it was more artistic. It was, a waterfall, a water piece, and many people were saying, "Oh, we can't have that kind of art. We want to have a big orca, a big salmon or something." And so, committees were formed, and testimony was taken by different people. It was quite an interesting time, and we all voted on it. And I remember in particular, it was between realistic art and representative art versus, more abstract art versus modern art. And there was one teacher of art in particular, her name was Annie Friedman, and she taught art history, and she gave a presentation, I think that clinched it, and she explained art and the meaning of art. And so when they voted on it, they voted for George Tsurakawa's orcas. And there it is. Today, I thought it was, one of the great things. But it did create quite a brouhaha, as most art pieces do.